Hello, hello. Welcome back to the podcast. Okay, today we are talking about decolonized weight loss. And before we begin, I want to invite you to take a breath in through your nose, into your belly, and then just exhale slowly, feel your body, because this conversation it's not just for your mind. It is for all of you, for your body, your lineage, your freedom. We've got a lot to unpack today. And I'm so happy that you are here joining me because this really is so revolutionary. And just let this episode, this entire series really be about reclamation and true freedom. I want you to know right from the get-go, right at the top of this episode, and for it to be so clear that we're not just talking about weight loss, although that's part of it. We are really talking about returning to wholeness. And I invite you to consider that for a moment. If your weight and your relationship with food and your body has felt like a battle, like it's been something that you've been at war with, and yes, you have a goal, you might have a very specific goal. Maybe you want to lose 10 pounds, 20 pounds, but you also know you want more than that. You want deeper than that. You want actual peace. You want to actually feel at peace with your body. You want to actually feel at peace with yourself and for your relationship as it relates to food and food decisions, to feel so trusting, so grounded, for all the noise to be gone, truly to be done with the weight struggle. That's about returning to wholeness. So I want you to know that as we've gone through each part of this 5-part series, this episode is part 5. And we're diving into decolonized weight loss. That is the kind of transformation and change that we are talking about, that I believe we have always deserved. All right, so let's get started. Couple of housekeeping things. First, this episode, as I mentioned, is part of a 5-part series. I highly recommend that you listen to this series in order. Each episode builds on one another. First is empowered weight loss, then feminist weight loss, then holistic weight loss. The most recent episode was anti-racist weight loss. And now, last but most certainly not least, decolonized weight loss. That's the first thing. Second, in the previous episode, I talked about anti-racism. And I think for the most part, the vast majority of people have at least some idea about racism, what it is, what it means. Whereas today, we're going to do a deep dive. We're going to be talking about decolonized weight loss. And so as we talk about this term decolonize, most people either have never heard of this term or you've heard of it here and there. Maybe you've seen it somewhere. Like it's not brand new, but you don't really know what it means. That's most people. And so this is a topic that doesn't get as much airtime. And it is by design that most people don't know much about this and it hasn't been talked much about. But today we are giving it the airtime that it must be given because almost every corner of the world has been touched by the effects of colonization. If you're listening and all of this is brand new to you, please know it is okay. As I said, this is by design, but today we're bringing this to the table. We're going to shine a light on it and really show how colonization, how this affects women and our relationship with food, our relationship with our body. And it has affected those things deeply. Okay, so to get started here, I am going to define colonization the way that we're going to be talking about it today. And I'm going to start us off with a one-liner definition from Oxford Dictionary to set the foundation for this conversation. So here's the definition of colonization. It is the action, the process of settling among and establishing control over the indigenous people of an area. Here's another one-liner definition. It is a process or practice of control by one people over another group of people, often by establishing colonies, generally with the aim of economic dominance. In the process of colonization, colonizers may impose things such as religion, language, cultural practices, insert here ways of eating, ways of living. And I promise you, I always do this for you. We're going to circle it back to exactly why does this matter if you really want to be done struggling with weight and food, why it matters that it is an approach that is decolonized. Okay, I think that's a really good start. Just give us some clear, concise definitions of what does colonization mean, because we're talking about decolonized weight loss. So we have to understand, what does colonization mean? In those definitions, it really talked about what's happening to the land. So one group of people is settling in an area that is already inhabited by a group of people, colonizing that area, imposing dominance or control in that area, including those people. And what I want to add here is that colonization isn't just something that happened to land. Colonization is something, yes, that happened to the actual land. But when you think about those indigenous peoples that were already inhabiting those lands, colonization is also something that happened to our minds, our families, our traditions, our bodies, our rhythms. And we're going to already start connecting dots here. Our very sense, our very idea of what is quote unquote healthy or right or correct. Now, I want you to imagine a group of people coming from another place that already had their own way of life, their own way of eating, their own religious practices, cultural practice, comes to a place. There's already people here, and coming with this idea that the way they are doing life, including how they eat, how they dress, their culture overall is superior. And wherever they are arriving, and the indigenous peoples that are already there, labeling that as inferior. That is so much of what is part of the colonization process. To colonize something is to take it, label it as inferior, label that culture, their practices as inferior, try to erase it and replace it with something that benefits the colonizer. And so the process of colonization didn't just happen to the land, the property itself, the land. It happened to people. It happened to us. And I say us because there's definitely my family. So I'm first generation Mexican American. We're going to share some examples here in a minute. Spain colonized what is now Mexico. And so that is a deep part of the history of my ancestors and my lineage. That is part of my lineage and my family's history. So I'm going to be speaking about it that way. All right, let's talk about this some more. I'm going to give some stats because I want to really give a really good idea of how many countries in the world have been colonized in our history. As I mentioned, Spain colonized what is now Mexico, modern day Mexico, where the Mexica, often referred to as the Aztecs, the Mayas, and countless other indigenous nations already were in that area. Britain colonized India, displacing and dominating hundreds of distinct ethnic groups that already existed and lived on those lands far before Britain came along to colonize that area. France colonized West Africa, lands of Wolof, Fulani, Akan, and many more peoples and cultures that thrived in those areas long before this colonization and invasion. The United States colonized and continues to colonize Puerto Rico, home of the Taino people, which was actually first colonized by Spain, but still under U.S. colonization today. Portugal colonized Brazil. The Dutch colonized Indonesia. Spain also colonized the Philippines. And of course, let's not forget, right here in the U.S., this land was also colonized and taken from indigenous nations throughout the entire United States, what is now modern day United States. And so that is just a brief list. Almost every country on earth has been colonized. Here's some numbers. Out of the 193 current modern nations, at least 165 have been at one point colonized by European powers at some point. That is over 85% of the world's countries that have been colonized. And so what does this mean? Part of what this means is that colonization isn't rare. It's not the exception. It's not this rare thing that has only happened here and there. Like it wasn't this rare thing that only happened in Mexico with my ancestors and lineage. Oh, the contrary, it has been the global norm. And so when we talk about colonization, and this is why it's so important to talk about it, because that is over 85% of the world's countries. So imagine how many people this has affected, how many people's history and experience. When we talk about colonization, we're not talking about something that happened in a few isolated places. We are talking about a system that has touched over 85% of the world. And most of us are living current day, today, most of us. Me raising my hand over here because that is me. And if you're listening to my voice, that is most likely you in some way, shape, or form. Most of us are living in the aftershocks of colonization. Most of us were raised by people who were raised under systems built by colonizers. So colonization in countries all over the world violently erased indigenous and ancestral knowledge. That includes ways of eating, moving, resting, relating to the body that were rooted in harmony, community, abundance, so much wisdom, so much knowledge, all of that. Not all of it, but a lot of it, too much of it was violently erased in the process of colonizing and colonization. And so remember, we're naming the system. In every episode of this series, we've named the system. In the feminist weight loss episode, we named the system of patriarchy. In the anti-racist weight loss episode, we named white supremacy. We named racism. As we unpack decolonized weight loss, we are naming the system of colonization. So via this system of colonization, one of the things that were imposed, of course, is these European beauty ideals, but also food systems and their own ideas or imposed ideas of what does being healthy mean or what does unhealthy mean. They imposed, yes, beauty ideals, which I think this gets more airtime and good. We need to give it airtime so that we can have awareness and empower ourselves, but also to understand that ideas of what healthy is, of what life should look like, of what life should be. Work practices. They imposed all their own cultural ideas that they brought with them and imposed that. And then that created this disconnect, that disconnected people, entire groups of people from their own wisdom, their own knowing, their own values. So for so many women, especially if what I'm describing here is a part of your history, your family's history in your lineage, this created, and we often internalized these deep layers of internalized shame, body shame, and generational disconnection from our bodies, from the wisdom, the insights, and the knowing. There was a disconnect there. And then instead, there's been so much internalized shame and specifically body shame. And I'll even take a minute here and explain that. We did talk about this in terms of race and racism and skin color when we talked about anti-racism. And there's definitely overlap here, but I also want to offer it through this lens. Okay, imagine there's a group of people. They come to this place. There's already people here, and they bring their ideas of what beauty is, of what health is, of what life is supposed to be, and then impose and teach that what was already there is not good, is inferior, and even is bad. That is what so many of us as women still experience and have internalized through generations. Still today is this shame of like, oh, what I have is bad. What I have is not good enough. We still have so many of us, because we don't have this awareness to be able to name it and call it out. When we look in the mirror and see this body that doesn't fit the mold, fit the ideas of what has been the standard that has been upheld as this is what's adequate, acceptable, beautiful, successful. We have internalized those ideas, those beliefs, and it's created these deep layers of internalized shame, body shame. And of course, this is especially true for women of color and those communities, those cultures that have had this history of colonization. And this history, It's not just in textbooks, but here's where we really want to connect these dots so powerfully. This history is in our kitchens. It's in our mirrors. When we look at our own bodies, when we look at our own plates on the table or look at our own bodies, this history, how it is very alive and well, it's in how we judge ourselves, often not knowing and not understanding where it's coming from. Every time we look in the mirror, open the fridge, see what's on our plate or what's on the scale, especially if there's a weight loss goal. And I hope that you're starting to see the connection here and why this matters. And as I said in the anti-racist episode, I believe the same is true here. To have an approach that is decolonized benefits everyone, because it benefits all of us to stop upholding these standards, these ideas that anything is superior, that any way of being, of looking, of eating, of dressing, any type of hair, a certain type of height is superior than another. At a most foundational level, that is how I see decolonized weight loss. It's like there's no assumption that anything is superior. We as individuals get to decide what is best for us. I get to decide what's best for me. You get to decide what's best for you. But in order to truly, truly do that, we have to be able to call out the system of colonization that very clearly has said, hey, this is superior, this is better, and this over here is inferior. We have to be able to call that out and then weed it out from our own selves so that we can truly actually just be able to decide, hey, what is the way of eating that feels best for me, for my body? What are the goals and the changes that feel best for me, for my body? Okay, so we've talked in depth about what colonization is. Colonization is the colonizer occupying land, claiming it as theirs, imposing their laws, beliefs, culture, imposing it through brute force as the standard. As they colonize the land, they spread the lie that their religion, their language, their food, their skin color, their appearance, their culture, everything of theirs was superior, imposing that way of life as the norm. In doing so, erasing traditions of the native culture, civilization, indigenous people, their wisdom, their rhythms, their practices, their entire cultures and ways of life, while simultaneously extracting from the people and the land. And the dots we want to connect here is this is how colonization shows up in diet culture today. What's considered healthy is very often sanitized, whitewashed, and Eurocentric. Meanwhile, foods from non-European cultures get labeled as ethnic or even bad, even though they nourished communities for generations. So then, to decolonize, let's unpack that actual term here for the purposes of this conversation, for the purpose of this mission, for women to be done battling their bodies, done struggling with food. To decolonize means to reject the lie of being inferior. What it means to decolonize in this area of our life means rejecting the idea, the lie that anyone else holds authority over your body. What is best for you? What is most suiting for you? And so this is a reclamation. This is reclaiming. It's one of the reasons I use this word in the title of my podcast, Reclaiming the Last 10, because we are going to the core. We're going to the heart of all of this and truly reclaiming what was always our choice to begin with, the choices over our own bodies and what is right for you and what is true for you and what feels good for you, for your body, for your life. When I think about colonization as a system, the violence, the abuse of power, the extractive nature of one group of people arriving at a territory, treating that group of people in this inferior way. I mean, there is literature of when colonizers came to a quote unquote new land and describing the people there as savages, as animals, and worse. And then being so extractive of not only the land and also the people. A lot of people don't know this, but the indigenous people were chained. They were forced to be labor. I mean, they were enslaved. They were enslaved. So not only was there this, hey, this is superior, we're superior, our way of life is superior, your way of life is inferior. Also, your bodies and your existence is inferior. And also, we're going to be extractive of the land and you, the people. And I think this is so important to include here. I feel such sacred rage when I think about when my body and my soul remember and know the trauma that my ancestors experienced, the grief, the exploitation, the violence, the abuse. There is sacred rage. But do not confuse sacred rage with hatred. This is not hatred towards a person or group of people. As I've mentioned many times and have stated super clearly, the purpose of any of my work is not to blame or shame. Not at all. It is about naming the systems, naming the harm. Just like we named patriarchy and racism, now we're naming colonization. Now we're naming the system of colonization, and we're naming the harm of it. I feel such sacred rage when I think about how the Spaniards came to what is now Mexico and Latin America and treated the indigenous people as inferior, when in fact they were effing brilliant. If you're familiar with the history of that part of the world, the Mexicas, often referred to as the Aztecs, they had engineered at that time in the 1500s, and even before that, they had been able to create intricate, advanced water systems. They had these incredibly advanced aqueducts and even floating islands or floating gardens called chinampas that nourished entire cities. Their capital city, Tenochtitlan, was cleaner and more sophisticated than any European city of that time. They were brilliant. The Maya tracked planetary movement with such mathematical precision. They built and put together calendars that outlived empires. That to this day, their calendars and the level of precision that they had, still to this day, has people in awe. They were not inferior. They were not primitive. The Inca in what is now modern day Peru, at that time, we're talking hundreds and hundreds years ago, 1500s and even before that, were already at that time performing successful skull surgeries, cranial trepanation to relieve pressure or injuries to the brain at that time, way back then, with survival rates that shocks modern day scientists to this day. And they also the Inca had intricate road systems across the mountains, and they practiced agriculture at multiple altitudes, utilizing mind-blowing engineering. So these civilizations, just to give a few examples, they were not primitive. They were not inferior. They were powerful, innovative, deeply wise. Colonizers came and treated the indigenous peoples and civilizations around the world as inferior when actually, as I already said, they were effing brilliant. And this happened all around the world. And its effects have lasted generations. So if you have ever felt sacred rage, please know it is part of necessary healing, of important healing. For all of us who carry this in our lineage, this sacred rage is medicine. And remember, the sacred rage is not hatred. The sacred rage is medicine. And what I want to share with you here is that I give it outlets through writing, through dance, through music. And in that expression, in that processing, there is healing. In fact, I can look back at my life, especially those times when there was so much emotional eating, so much self-sabotage, and I just felt so uncomfortable in my own body. And I know so much of my emotional eating and sabotage was internalized emotion, was internalized self-hatred and feelings of inferiority and inadequacy that the colonizer taught us. This is what the colonizer taught us, an internalized shame. And so much of that shifted, everything shifted when I learned to allow myself that it is okay to honor whatever it is that I was feeling, to know how to process those emotions, including anger, including this sacred rage, and to be able to have ways, techniques, strategies to support myself in that, through that, and process and heal. This is generational healing, ancestral healing. And this is why emotional processing is such a huge part of what I teach in my programs and courses, because emotions are not a problem. Emotions are part of us as human, especially when there are very real things that we are navigating and have navigated. Our history and our experiences as humans are complex and sometimes hard. And yes, there are emotions. And so what is so powerful is to be empowered with awareness so that you can understand yourself, understand what it is that you may be experiencing, be able to understand certain patterns so that you can change them if you want to. If it's something that you want to change, be able to understand what it is that you need. And also when there are emotions to be processed, to be able to do that, to have the tools to be able to do that, the strategies to care for your emotional needs. So that is why I share with you that I feel sacred rage. And so when we've been taught that our body, our food, our culture, our very being isn't good enough, that shame tends to get internalized by default. It becomes self-doubt, self-sabotage, and we feel it as this relentless pressure to shape ourselves to fit this made-up standard. And so if you've ever felt this way, I really want you to hear me right now. This is not a personal failure. This is colonization in action. This is diet culture in action, which one of my biggest goals with this episode is that you'll be able to see so clearly, be able to see this for yourself, how diet culture is so deeply rooted in colonization. It's one of the ways that colonization lives on. It's through this belief that we're not doing enough, not being enough, or we're not eating quote unquote right, that whatever it is you are doing, who you are, is inferior in some way. And so, of course, all of this has kept our relationships with our bodies and with food feeling like a battleground with all kinds of emotions. It's, for so many of us, what has bred so much of the weight struggle. And it's this invisible script that so many of us as women are still living out unknowingly. Because remember, this is by design that we don't have awareness of this. But we're changing that. We are changing that. Because when you erase a woman's culture, disconnect her from her body, and then feed her a bullshit narrative about what she should be, about what should be on her plate, about how she should behave, about how her body should look like, of course women end up feeling like they're failing. Of course, women end up feeling so much mistrust in themselves and sabotaging. But again, that is not a personal failing. And you are not personally flawed. This is the legacy of colonization. And once again, diet culture being one of its most effective tools, just like we said with patriarchy and just like we said with racism and white supremacy. Where I want to bring your attention to in this moment, because now we've talked about what is colonization, what does that mean, how it has affected entire groups of people. Where I want to bring your attention to now is to see how this really shows up in diet culture. This is something that I see so much in coaching brilliant women, my clients. There is so much shame around food and around our bodies because there's this idea in diet culture that there's one right way to eat. There's one right way to be healthy. There's one right way for bodies to look and to be. And now that we've unpacked colonization as a system, you should feel very empowered right now to see, oh yeah, I can completely see where that comes from. I can completely see where this idea comes from, that there's one right way to be healthy, one right way to eat, one right way for bodies to move. This has created so much suffering for women, so much suffering for women. This has created that our relationship with our bodies feels like a battlefield. This has been a huge part of what has created that, even that our relationship with food and what we put on our plates and what we eat feels like a battlefield, because there's this idea that there's something that is the norm, that there's something that is right and better and superior and best, that really others everything else, that really erases the deep, deep wisdom of anything that is outside of that from all kinds of other cultures and traditions. So this is one of the ways that it shows up in diet culture, that there's this one norm and that's what it should look like. And if you're doing anything outside of that, then you're doing it wrong. In fact, think about this. We're going to treat this like a little exercise. You can even close your eyes if you want, but I want you to just imagine a healthy meal. Just imagine a plate like a healthy dinner or a healthy breakfast. You're probably going to imagine a certain kind of thing. And then I want you to imagine ethnic foods, a dish that would be considered ethnic. The fact that this even happens in our brain says a lot about what we've been taught, because what it looks like to quote unquote eat healthy compared to what are often referred to as ethnic foods, it centers, by default, it centers the colonizer, Eurocentric foods, way of eating, etc. And it others everything else. When you've been taught that your body, your food, your culture, your very being is not enough, that shame gets internalized and it becomes self-doubt, self-sabotage, and this heavy pressure, this pressure that can feel so heavy to cram yourself into a mold, to fit the quote unquote standard, the norm. And I want you to know that if you've for yourself that this area of your life, as it relates to your relationship with food, your relationship with your body, if there's been tons of patterns of sabotage and shame and self-doubt and criticism, that is colonization in action. That is colonization in action. This is part of how colonization lives on, is through our plates. It's through us believing our own bodies are not enough because they don't fit the mold that has deemed as what's the norm and superior. This is how colonization lives on, through the belief that you're not doing enough, not being enough, that you're not eating quote unquote right. And then our body decisions feel like a battleground. This is one of the things that has contributed so significantly to the weight struggle for so many of us. I can share with you my own story. So as you likely know, especially if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, I studied nutrition. I studied holistic nutrition, women's hormones, all of that. But I remember, especially then, things have changed a bit where I think there's more diversity and representation overall compared to, let's say, 15 years ago or so. I formally studied nutrition, holistic nutrition, and I remember looking in those books, and none of those foods looked like anything from my culture. None of those foods looked like anything from the day-to-day of my culture, but also from the wisdom of my culture. And this is just giving my own example. I'm sure we could say the same thing about many other cultures of the world. And so if I made being healthy, quote unquote, mean exactly what I was seeing in those books, that would literally mean that I would need to erase my culture. Yes, the foods from my culture, but also a lot of the wisdom from my culture and a lot of the healing from my culture. If I was to mimic and copy what was straight out of those books that was being taught, that I was learning, formally studying, as here is what is most healthy, I would be erasing literally my culture from my life in many ways, in many layers. I'm so glad that I am who I am, because for me, that just never worked. And it's a big part of why, quote unquote, dieting never worked for me, because it was non-explicitly asking me to leave out, or maybe even cut out, maybe even erase an entire part of me, which happened to be a part of me that I love, a part of me that I didn't want to leave out or cut out or erase. And so because I am very much in my nature a trailblazer, I decided that that was not going to work for me. I was not going to just erase this whole piece of me. I was not going to just erase so much of the wisdom and the beauty and the joy and the pleasure and the taste and the seasonings and the spices, right? I could go down the list. I was not going to erase all of those things that were connected to my culture, that were an important part of my life that I loved, in exchange for weight loss or for quote unquote health. Deep inside, I believed somewhere that there had to be another way. There had to be another way, because I also knew that there were things I wanted to change. I also knew that there was a lot of emotional eating that was happening. I also knew, at least on some level, that food had become a way for me to cope with things that felt stressful or hard or overwhelming. I also knew that I didn't feel completely comfortable in my body, and there were things that I wanted to change. I did want to change some habits. I did want to lose weight, but I did not want to erase or leave out an entire part of myself in the process. I just knew there had to be another way. I think this is so true for so many women. There are going to be so many of you that listen to this episode, and you are going to be like, oh my gosh, maybe even in tears, just feeling so seen. Because I wanted to both change my relationship with my body for it to feel loving and empowered. And I wanted to be able to go on a run and have energy. As I mentioned in the last episode, there was a point where I had gained so much weight, and my relationship with food was not one that I loved. Honestly, it felt toxic. Like there was so much overeating and emotional eating, but I had gained so much weight and I felt so physically uncomfortable in my body that I struggled to tie my shoes. So I wanted to feel better, and I wanted to take care of me better, but I also wanted to enjoy a carne asada with my family. And I am honestly feeling choked up just saying that. Like, for you listening, you may not be Mexican, your family's culture, your culture may be something completely different, but you can feel the heart of what I'm saying there, that there is a connection with food and culture. And so you can see how colonization has played a role in diet culture. If your weight loss approach feels like you have to erase and leave out and completely cut off that connection with what feels like your culture, your family culture, these traditions that feel so meaningful for you, let me just tell you right now, you don't have to cut that out. You don't have to erase that part if you don't want to. This always comes back to choice. And so I am so glad. I'm so thankful for Brendita back in the day. I just knew there has to be a different way. There has to be a different way. And so I forged a new way. And like I said, I didn't at that time know how much I know now about colonization and decolonizing, but that is why I learned it the hard way. And I learned it the hard way without having it all laid out so clearly for me. And I want to lay it out clearly for anyone who needs it, which I think is a lot of women. And what I found is, there is a way to do this where instead of the approach, really essentially it's asking me to cut out this entire part of myself that is so meaningful for me. Instead, the approach was one that connected with myself even deeper, that connected me with my body even deeper, that connected me with my own wisdom even deeper, connected me with my desires and what's important for me even deeper. Now I am so connected with my body. My relationship with my body has healed and gone way beyond the decisions that have to do with food, which, by the way, feels so loving and so powerful and so anchored into my own values, like the things that are important for me. I am so glad that I decided to reject an approach that was asking of me to become even more disconnected from myself and important parts of me. I'm so glad that I decided to reject that because it just never felt right. And also it just never worked. Because in case you're new to the podcast, You haven't heard me talk about this before. That struggle with weight and food, that was 2 decades. So I gave it a fair shot. It just never worked. I'm so glad that I rejected that approach that asked me to erase entire parts of myself. And so decolonized weight loss, I've already started to describe it, and I hope that you can already start to feel it. It's about more connection to you, your body, your wisdom, your culture, whatever that may be for you. And I'm using the word culture very loosely here. It doesn't have to be a country with a flag. That's not what we're talking about necessarily. It might be, but I'm using the word culture very loosely here. It might be your family's culture. Each family, each household, even each group of friends kind of has a culture. That's how I'm using this word culture. But just using it loosely, what it means is like the things that are important to you, the things that you value, the things that you want to be connected with. It's about a deeper connection, because decolonized weight loss means that instead of having this one way of life kind of up on a pedestal as if it is the way and there's no other way and everything else is inferior. Can you hear all the ideas of colonization there? That's a diet culture. That's a big part of diet culture. Decolonized weight loss says, no, nothing's on a pedestal. No, nothing. Let's take everything off of that pedestal. And you as an individual, you just get to choose what works for your body, what feels good for you, what makes sense for your life. And we make wellness and healthy truly more inclusive versus putting it on a pedestal and then only that is superior and acceptable and everything else is inferior and shameful. What if wellness and healthy and nourishment, and I'll give one of my own examples, but make this your own. What if that looks like the caldo that my abuelita makes that's full of veggies and all these special seasonings that she's known that her mom taught her and her mom taught her? What if that's wellness too? What if that can be healthy too? What if wellness and healthy and healing can look like singing and drumming and dancing? And look, I'm bringing in singing and drumming and dancing here very much on purpose, because most content that you see anywhere or hear anywhere that has to do about weight loss is all about like the food. But I hope, especially now on the 5th episode of this series, you can feel that and just see that right away now, how limited that is. It's not a problem, but it's limited. It actually limits us. Why would we want to be limited? You as a human are amazing and vast. And why can't our wellness be? Why can't healing be? I would argue that it is. It is. And that's why the old way hasn't worked, because it has been so limited. It has been so, here's the one right way, leaving out so much wisdom, so much healing. And so that is decolonized weight loss. It's more expansive. It's more connection. It is a reclamation. If you think back to that imagery of like, here comes a group of people and they're coming to this territory and they are imposing, here's how we do religion. Here's how you dress. Here's how you work the lands. Just imposing ideas after ideas, a way of living, imposing a culture. Decolonized weight loss is a reclaiming of that, where you essentially get to look at your life, your body decisions, food decisions, what's on your plate, and you reclaim, hey, all of this is really actually my choice. It's mine to decide. I am reclaiming that it is mine to decide, and no one else can impose in this area of my life what is right for me. That is decolonized weight loss. It is standing firm in this area of your life that no one else gets to define what wellness, what self-care, what healing looks like for you. No one else gets to decide what quote unquote healthy eating looks like for you, or what feeling good and feeling healthy and nourishing yourself or feeling good in your body looks like for you. That is yours and yours to decide. And this whole idea that there's something superior and the right way is the colonizer lie. That is the lie of the colonizer. So specifically in the context of diet culture, that is the lie. That is the lie. That is the lie that we are calling out today, that there is one way to eat, that there is one right way to eat, that there is one right way to behave. that there is one right way to make food decisions, that there is one right way to quote unquote be healthy. So many of my clients that have worked with me and learned my process, you've heard them in interviews here on the podcast. You've seen written accounts where they share about their experience. And what they say time and time again is true freedom, food freedom, food freedom. Like, I've never truly experienced this level of food freedom. This is where it comes from. And this is part of what has to happen in order for this to truly feel free. And when you actually really feel like that deep trust and connection versus like you're freaking out because like, did I mess things up? Did I sabotage? But instead you feel this deep sense of trust, this deep coming from this deep connection with yourself and your body and all the things that are so important to you as an individual. That is true freedom and food freedom. And this is how we create it. It's why this conversation was essential, because we also have to understand what's keeping us from feeling that way. What has been keeping most women from feeling that way in the first place? And there are some who argue that, if we're talking about decolonizing, there are some who argue that we can't literally decolonize, that once the land has been occupied, we can't undo the harm, we can't go back. That decolonizing is not a thing that is something we can literally do. And maybe that's true. And I'll leave that part of the conversation to the historians and those experts. And not because it isn't important, but because that's just not the focus of this conversation. This conversation is about you, your body, your relationship with food, your freedom from struggling with weight and food. And I want you to know that I have lived it, experienced it in my own life, and I have seen this as possible with so many women that I've worked with, that it is possible to reclaim this area of our lives, to reconnect with ourselves and our bodies and really return to wholeness, to peace, to self-care and decisions around food that are based in love and a deep connection with ourselves and our own body. And if you've ever felt that having a weight loss goal, if there's changes that you want to make in certain habits that you have, or the way that you take care of yourself, or certain emotional eating habits, if you've ever felt that that's a vain thing, that it's a selfish thing, when we look at it through this lens, it actually is one of the most powerful things that we are able to do in our lifetime is to reclaim this area of our life for ourselves. So it is not vain or selfish. It is deep, healing, powerful work, and it matters. And before we wrap up this episode, I want to make a little note here about rest, because colonization didn't just take land, steal land. It also took our time, our rest, our rhythms. Here's what I mean by this, okay? So colonizers looked to benefit from the land and the people, to extract, right? To benefit. And so, of course, it was in the colonizers' interest to teach people that unless they were producing, they were not valuable. Unless they were producing, they were lazy. Because if they weren't producing, then that meant they weren't producing for them. It's why for so many of us, for generations, rest has felt dangerous, because at one point it really was. It's why for so many of us, rest, like just doing nothing, pleasure, feels indulgent, or like I said, even dangerous. As I mentioned, this is so personal in my own history, my family's history, in my lineage, in my DNA. So I'll share an example. Mexico was initially colonized in the 1500s. And so that was hundreds of years ago. That was generations ago. And I can tell you, I can feel that is something that I'm still actively healing in my own system, in my own nervous system. And I can see that with so many of the clients that I work with. I've seen it in my own personal experience and also professional, working with hundreds of brilliant women in the last 10-ish years of doing this work. And you may ask yourself, like, okay, I can see how that's important because rest is important. But what does that have to do with weight or weight loss or sabotage? Well, a lot of the overeating and emotional eating patterns that I work with my clients on come from overworking and overexhaustion. there's overworking happening, there's overexhaustion. And then the overeating and the emotional eating is actually a way of coping when really what is needed is rest. So this piece is significant. Our bodies know that rest matters, that it's important, but we were taught something different. Our ancestors were taught something different. And so now with this awareness, we can return to this wisdom. We can weed out the bullshit. We can call it out, and the healing can begin and continue. So I just wanted to name that because that's really important. And it is something that I believe is worth doing. I consider myself that I am a generational maker and that I am doing healing in my own lineage. And it's not always easy, but I always am so honored that I have the opportunity and the privilege to. And also when I think about my daughter and the fact that she from me will learn something different, because I've been able to create this deep awareness of the effects of colonization, the effects it had as it relates to my sense of self-worth, to my body image, my relationship with food. And I've been able to do so much healing and create so much change. And now so much of that I won't pass on to her. I won't hand it down as a part of our lineage because I've transformed it. I've alchemized it. And to me, that is absolutely priceless. As I mentioned a while back on the podcast, I have been studying with Mayan teachers this past year. I've been working and studying cacao as medicine. And I have been in awe, just in awe of the wisdom, of the deep, deep healing and power and ancestral knowing. It is just mind-blowing. It blows my mind every time. And it does sadden me to think that so much of this kind of wisdom, it does get looked down on or deemed as less. And that's because of these colonizer beliefs that deem certain things as superior, certain cultures, certain ways of life, and others inferior. And it's a damn shame because this wisdom, this healing, this medicine would benefit everyone. I cannot even tell you how my relationship with myself, my healing, how it has deepened and expanded in ways that I would have never imagined. And this kind of healing and connection and power could have never came from someone just telling me, how many grams of protein to eat or how much green veggies to put on my plate. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with that. Eat kale, eat protein. Those things are great. But the point here is, why limit ourselves the way diet culture and colonizer culture has taught us to limit ourselves with these limited ideas of what should be the norm, of the way we should all live our lives or eat or take care of our bodies. What I want to offer here is that actually there's something so much more expansive available, so much more expansive. And that is what happens when we decolonize weight loss, when we decolonize wellness, when we decolonize self-care. We actually just open the door and you allow all of this to be personalized to you. One of my clients' favorite lessons in the last 10, which is my signature coaching program, happens right in week 1. It's a lesson where I walk my clients through creating their own food culture. My clients love this lesson. It is revolutionary. It is game-changing. And this is exactly what is needed for so many of us. This is exactly what had to happen for me so that this area of my life really felt custom made and actually felt empowering. And I actually experienced food freedom and no more sabotage and no more feeling inadequate and no more feeling shame about the way that it felt good for me to eat and take care of myself and my body. So of course, come and join us. If you're listening, you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I want a decolonized approach. I'm sick of this old way that just only creates suffering for people and has kept us all suffering. It's what's been so toxic for all of us, no matter where you come from. This idea that there's one right way to eat, one right way to be healthy, one right way to behave, or to live or to look has created so much suffering, so much stuckness, so much internalized shame. And it most certainly does not create freedom, most certainly does not create empowerment. And now we get to reject that. And now you get to reclaim what is yours, which is that you get to decide what is best for you. You get to decide what's best for your body. You get to decide what you want on your plate. You get to decide what your goals are, whether you want to lose weight or not. And if you do want to lose weight, what does that look like for you? There is no one right answer. And most certainly, there is no one right answer for everyone. That's just wild. It doesn't even make sense. Because if your weight loss journey asks you, whether implicitly or explicitly, to erase any part of yourself, any part of you that's important to you, your culture, your roots, your joy, your food, your people, then that is not healing. That is not healing. That's assimilation. That's trying to squeeze ourselves in some sort of mold, and we're done with that. This is empowered weight loss. This is feminist weight loss. This is holistic weight loss. This is anti-racist weight loss. And this is decolonized weight loss. And you deserve nothing less. All right, my sister, let's wrap this one up. Thank you for joining me here today. This is so powerful. If you've loved this episode and it has felt incredibly valuable for you on your journey, please, it would mean so much for me. You can leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts, and also share this episode on social media. Let's get this information into the hands of more women that are needing it. If this conversation spoke to your soul, and if you are ready to stop struggling, stop self-sabotaging, and instead create change from deep self-care, deep self-love, transformation that feels like an honoring of yourself and your body, this is your invitation to come and join me inside of the last 10. This isn't about dieting. This is about empowerment. This is about freedom. This is about reclaiming this area of your life. It's about creating a relationship with food and your body that feels powerful and loving and rooted in your truth, not anyone else's version of wellness. I invite you to come be part of our revolutionary space and come experience what decolonized empowered weight loss can actually look like in your life. You can go to brendalamelly.com or click the link in the show notes to learn more. Come and join us. I can't wait to see you. I can't wait to support you and be in your corner, because I want you to know that you do not have to do this alone. I would be honored, deeply honored, to be a support for you in this process. I send you tons of love, and I'll see you here next time.